Welcome everyone to our last couple of lightning talks. And then we also have a raffle in the last half of this hour, which should be quite fun. So before we begin, the usual disclaimers. This is being recorded, just so that you're all aware for the conference. Closed captions are available. There is a closed captions box that you can turn on and off at the bottom of the screen. Our tech assistant, who I believe is Dana this time around, has very kindly posted the links to our code of conduct and our collaborative note-taking with Padlet document if you would like to take some collaborative notes. Speaking of our tech assistant, Dana is our tech assistant, so if you need any help with any of the technology, please message her. Our timing for these lightning talks is that we'll have a 5-minute talk plus a couple of minutes for Q&A, and then we'll go into our next lightning talk and have the same timing for that. So we are just having 2 lightning talks presented at this particular moment in time. Our first one is from Claire Sharifi, who presented on adapting complex library instruction earlier this week. She's a reference and instruction librarian at the University of San Francisco, and at the moment she's going to be presenting student voices, library displays during COVID-19. And Claire, would you like to take over the screen?
Sure thing. Thank you so much. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Everyone can see my slides okay? All right. So hello, everyone. Hello again. I'm going to talk about hearing student voices through library displays during COVID-19. So Claire Sharifi, reference and instruction librarian at the University of San Francisco. So every spring, USF School of Nursing and Health Professions holds the Crawford Lecture, which is an endowed lecture meant to provide education for the community and the university. It's a big event for the School of Nursing. It's well attended by students, faculty, alumni, and community partners. In 2019, Gleason Library had a really successful partnership working with the School of Nursing on the Crawford Lecture. The speaker that year was author and nurse Josephine Ensign. And Josephine Ensign was speaking about homelessness. And to complement the lecture, I worked with the Masters in Public Health class that created library displays. These displays actually took the place of a research paper in the course for that semester. And this was a really successful, powerful, multifaceted collaboration. And we really wanted to continue our partnership with the Crawford Lecture in 2020. So early last February, a staff member from the School of Nursing and I started planning, and the topic for the Crawford Lecture was going to be on behavioral health and mental health services in San Francisco. And we had a handful of graduate nursing students really interested in participating in creating a library display. And then because of COVID, we had to move to online education. And unfortunately, the Crawford Lecture was actually canceled that year. So the students were still really committed to creating something. And because the lecture was canceled, they had this freedom to create something new and different and really relevant to them. So the Crawford Lecture became the Crawford Project, and the School of Nursing staff member and I made it clear to the students that this was their project. They had ownership over it, and we were here to support them. The students met every week on their own as a support group for each other. That's how they defined it and identified their work. And the staff member and I would join them periodically. And through those conversations, they created this really beautiful self-reflective digital display that I am going to show you now. Okay, so the display consists of, so I'm going to scroll down a little bit. We have a little introduction, and then the display consists of an essay from every group member, supplemented by some relevant library resources. We had lots of conversations about what platform we use, and we eventually landed on using the library's WordPress blog. So in terms of content, the students had complete control over the images. These are all images that they provided, and the text. So here's each group member. And then when we scroll down, we have their essays, as well as, so the essays and text, as well as an audio file. we decided to include an audio file of the student reading their own essay because when we were in a meeting prepping, they read a draft and we were all reminded of how much we like listening to each other's voices and hearing each other's stories read aloud. So they recorded audio files on their own, sent them to me, and I uploaded them to WordPress and to SoundCloud. And SoundCloud has a really nice integration with WordPress. So like I said, I'm going to scroll down. I hope I don't make anyone seasick. But like I said, we did incorporate some library resources with every essay. So this is Labake's entry, and hers was on parenting and academics during COVID. So we included a book on parenting from the library's collection, some scholarly journal articles, and some websites. And these students have all had library instruction sessions with me, so they were very capable of finding relevant library resources, but we took time during one of our meetings to work on this collaboratively. And at that meeting, we also kind of discussed responsible use of digital images, so adding alt text for accessibility, finding images licensed for reuse, Creative Commons license. So it was a really good, learning experience for them as well. So I'm going to play just a couple seconds of Tracy's audio file just so you can hear it.
Claire, we can't hear anything.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's possible that when you shared your screen, you didn't check share computer audio.
Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll pop the chat. I know we're almost out of time, but I will pop the chat into, I'll pop the link to this into the chat and folks can listen to it on their own. So I apologize for that. So I'll definitely share that, and I'll just wrap up really quickly. In terms of workload distribution, like I said, the students were all responsible for the content, and I took on putting it all together and putting it into this blog. That was a good learning experience in terms of working with WordPress. And it was a really positive experience. And it's a really interesting time capsule for these students of what it was like to be a nursing student during the first few months of quarantine and this pandemic. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Claire. If anyone has questions, please put them in the chat. We do have a couple of minutes for that. So I will give you all a couple minutes to think about it and put something in. Thank you very much. This is a really interesting project, and it turned out beautifully. Like, the website itself is quite gorgeous.
Thank you. That's really nice to hear, because that, like I said, I don't have a lot of experience with WordPress, so my design skills are not as sharp as they could be, but I'm glad to hear that it looks good.
It does look good. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat unless someone's typing at the last second, so we may have some extra time and just transition straight to our last lightning talk. Nancy? Okay, you're here already. Perfect. All right, so our second lightning talk today is from Nancy Shin. And she's presenting data visualizations for everybody.
Okay, I'm just going to share my screen now, so bear with me.
Take your time.
Okay, share. And then slideshow. Okay, can everyone see my slides okay? Thumbs up.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay, awesome. Okay, so welcome to my lightning talk, Data Visualizations for Everybody, a lesson on accessibility. My name is Nancy Shin, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I will be your presenter today. A little about myself. I'm the NNLM P&R Research and Data Coordinator at the University of Washington in Seattle, and previously I was a Research Data Management Sewell Fund Librarian at Washington State University in Spokane. So now let's have a look at today's agenda. Today's agenda is quite simple and straightforward. The first thing we'll do is we'll address the question, what is web accessibility and digital inclusion? Then we'll look at who benefits from accessible data visualizations. And finally, we'll look at the 6 easy ways to make your data visualizations accessible. So what do we mean by web accessibility and digital inclusion? Well, according to the World Wide Web Consortium's W3C, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, which is the gold standard in web accessibility guidance, web accessibility means that, and I quote, websites, tools, and technologies are designed and developed so that people with disabilities can use them. People can perceive, understand, navigate, and interact with the web and contribute to the web. Web accessibility encompasses all disabilities that affect access to the web, including auditory, cognitive, neurological, physical, speech, and visual, end quote. So web accessibility is part of digital inclusion, which refers to how website browsers, apps, and other digital infrastructure can be used by people with auditory, cognitive, neurological, physical, speech, and visual disabilities. So the big question that I ask you now is, who benefits from accessible data visualizations? Well, the answer is surprising and simple. Web accessibility benefits people with disabilities, be it a permanent, temporary, or situational disability. It also benefits people without permanent disabilities in the following ways. For example, it benefits people using smartphones, smartwatches, smart TVs, and other technology with small visual displays and screens. As well, it positively affects older people with changing abilities as a result of aging. It benefits people with temporary disabilities, such as someone who has lost their glasses or someone who has broken their arm, for example. In the same way, it also benefits people with situational disabilities, such as someone in bright sunlight or someone in a place where listening to audio can be quite challenging. And lastly, accessible data visualizations can benefit people with slow internet connections or who have limited or expensive bandwidths. So now that we know what web accessibility is and who benefits from it, how can we design with accessibility in mind? There are 3 easy ways to make your data visualization accessible. The first way is to add alternative text or alt text to your images and charts. Alternative text is displayed when the image cannot be. Screen readers, which are the assistive technology used by people who are visually impaired, read the alternative text out loud. So do have valuable, descriptive, and succinct alt text. Don't use alt text that's vague and non-descriptive, like figure 4 JPEG. Good alt text includes one sentence that identifies the chart type, for example, bar chart, line chart, and it should also have a corresponding data table for the shown bar chart, pie chart, or line chart data. The second way to make your data visualization accessible is do use a takeaway title that includes the meaning of the visualization or point. With takeaway titles, people know instinctively what to look for in data when they read the graph takeaway first, as it appears in the title. So don't use vague and undescriptive titles. The third way to make your data visualization accessible is to label data directly as much as possible. Do directly label your data rather than using legends. This will be particularly helpful for people who are colorblind or who have low vision, where they might experience some difficulty matching colors within the plot to those described in the legend. In general, don't use a legend or a key to explain your graph solely. So the fourth way to make your data visualization accessible is to look for type and color contrasts. A color palette contrast evaluation tool can be found at the North Carolina State University IT Accessibility Resources website, which is hyperlinked on this slide and available on the open, which is also available where all the slide decks are for this conference. In general, do use good contrast and a readable font size. For example, 16 point is usually the minimum. And don't use poor contrast and small font sizes. The fifth way to make your data visualization accessible is do use linear and logical layouts. Don't use or make complex layouts or menus. And finally, the sixth and final way to make your data visualization accessible is do use white space judiciously. Judicious use of white space increases the readability by helping to distinguish between different sections without relying solely on color. Don't pit color against color in bar graphs and pie graphs, for example, without a white divider line. So this brings you to the end of my presentation. I hope that you learned what it takes to bring your data visualization, to make your data visualization accessible. So now I'm open to some questions.
Thank you so much, Nancy. That is like very useful information. Thanks. If anyone has questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat, or if you would like to unmute yourself, you can go ahead and do that too. I'll just give people a minute to formulate their thoughts.
Thank you for the very kind comments. I'm glad you found the presentation helpful. And thanks, Dana, for putting in the link to my slide deck in the chat box. I really appreciate that.
So we have a couple of questions from Kitty Knappy. It's wondering what seems to be the biggest issues with digital data that is inaccessible?
What seems to be the biggest issues with digital data that is inaccessible? Just issues that it just discriminates against people who have disabilities. So that's the biggest issue, that it's not fair and it's not equitable to everybody, is the biggest issue with inaccessible digital data. And there's a lot of data. I mean, it depends on which organization you work for. It does making your data visualizations a little more accessible and accessible does take extra time and care, but it's worth it in the end because it's accessible to nearly everybody. So, but then there's some institutions who don't want to put in the extra costs that's involved and the time that's involved. It just depends on where you fall on the political spectrum.
Thank you. We have a question from Janice Kama. They're wondering, do you have some tangible examples of how we may describe images with alt text? I'm a newbie.
Okay, so for something like a graph, let's say you have a pie graph, you can say, well, this image or this image is a pie graph of, and then your takeaway title, like of the number of cookies that HSL staff eat on a regular basis. Something like that. Something not typical, but something along those lines of having a very clear takeaway title and maybe describing the data, saying that, oh, the top cookie eater was Nancy Shin. She ate like 10 cookies on a daily basis.
It's a good amount of cookies on a daily basis. Excellent. And then we have a question from Leslie G. Is making use of white space about creating more color contrast?
It's about creating like different it's about creating like different sections within a visualization. So it does black on white or color on white does create the best color contrast than to say you would have like a color combination like orange on red or something like that. So it does create really good color contrast. And I would check out that North Carolina State University color contrast tool, because as long as you know the RGB colors, you're able to, the color codes, you're able to type those in and it'll tell you whether or not it's accessible color contrast combination.
Excellent. That is very cool. Thank you. Are there any more questions here? Oh, sorry, here we go. Clarification from Kitty. What is the most common mistake that people make that keeps the data from being inaccessible?
Oh, okay. People forget to add the alt text. That's a big thing. I mean, it's so simple, or they do add alt text, but it's like non-descriptive and it's not very useful. So it's very vague. So it's one of the don'ts that I suggest that you not do is try to keep it as descriptive as possible. So if you have a picture of, let's say, a bar graph of the number of cookies that UW-HSL librarians ate in a week, you should you should highlight the most important points on the graph, that the max was like 10 and that was eaten by Nancy or something like that.
Do you have
So
any recommendations for like the length of the alt text? Should it be?
I think the more descriptive, the better, because it just helps with somebody who has low vision or who is visually impaired get some context about what's presented in front of them. And also what I find helpful is that with your alt text, and if you are showing, let's say, a pie graph or a bar graph or a line graph, it's really important that you show the data in table format too. So accompany the visualization of the graph itself as a table below with the data inputted in the table, so that the screen reader will read the table data to the person with the disability, and they'll be able to understand sort of like the patterns that may be revealed through the visualization itself.
Oh, that's really great to know. Thank you. We have a couple of folks who've dropped some very handy links in the chat. So there's an accessibility tool from Dana, Color Contrast Analyzer, and then Leslie G has just recommended a source for making accessible PowerPoints.
Yeah, and also too, with like the Microsoft products, they always have an accessibility checker. That's really important to run through all your documentation through the accessibility checker. So it'll tell you that when you have images in your document, when those images are missing alt text, it'll say edit alt text or missing alt text. And so you can add alt text to things that you may have overlooked or forgotten. To add alt text too.
That is great to know. I've never used that feature. We have another question from Linda Howell. If the visible text is going to highlight the important features, so like the high cookie eater or something like that, should that still be repeated in the alt text? Do we worry about redundancy?
So if the visible text is going to highlight the important visual, well, I think the more clear you are, I don't think it's always good to err on the side of too much information when it comes to screen readers, because the more information, contextual information you're able to provide, the more it's going to help the user in the end, or the person on the receiving end of the visualization. So you may have like insert text box on the graph, and then you'll have to describe whether or not those text box, what's in the text box too. So it's almost easier for you, for the graph itself, to attach an alt text that explains everything that's on the graph, from the most important point on the graph, or the take-home message or takeaway that you want somebody to walk away from looking at this graph, to describing what the chart type is.
Okay, that all sounds great. All right. If there's no more questions for Nancy, and I think that it seems like they've slowed down.
And if you have any questions, I'll just put my email address in the chat box. You can email them, and I'd be more than happy to respond to your questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries.